Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Inspected Goals, the podcast where we try to improve our FPL play through a more analytical approach. Slightly different this week. You'll have already noticed if you're watching rather than listening, but there's three of us on the podcast rather than two. For that reason, if you are watching live, if you can just let us know in the chat if there's any issues with audio or anything like that, that would be really helpful. And I'll do it one at a time because otherwise it will get confusing and we'll try not to speak over each other. Seb, how are you doing? How was your week? How's your FPL week? All those kind of things.
Hey mate, I'm okay, thank you. I'm okay. My FPL week has been fabulous. My real life week a little more tiring. So you have to excuse me if I yawn. We've had 2 nights in a row of a poorly toddler. But I'm sure some people know how that is. But FPL nearly makes up for it. You know, plenty of jam, I think. But nice when it's jam you can pretend you played for, as opposed to just randomness. So I will take it and pretend I'm very smart. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thank you. Yeah, life's a bit tough at the moment, but FPL's a nice little distraction, to be honest. And yeah, kind of really keen to chat to you guys as well through your plans. And I'm going on a different route in terms of FPL as well at the moment. I've not wildcarded yet, and I don't plan to wildcard in 10, so slightly different. Whereas Ben, you also wildcarded in 8, that's right, and have also done well off that.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a boost. My rank is a bit more like what I'm used to now, just up to 600k after a pretty good game week. Not as good as Seb, but still pretty good. And yeah, just a bit more relaxed about FPL and just had a good week as well. Just enjoy the last of the good weather before the winter sets in and the clocks go back and it gets dark and rainy. But
yeah. Nice. I guess I was kind of interested to. It's interesting to have you both on because there was a bit of a split in analytics around people wildcarding in 8, where I guess the majority went without Haaland, whereas you didn't, Ben. Along with a lot of other good FPL managers, like you said, you had exactly the same team as FPL Jan, who's ridiculously good at the game as well. So there are obviously lots of viable routes on game week 8. So I guess it might be. What I'll do first is I'll just show both of your teams as well, which I think is this slide. So yeah, on the screen now you can see both your teams. That might be quite small if you're watching on YouTube because they're on one slide, so you might want to full screen it. One of you has a team. Who played Turner this week? Was that Ben? Was that you, Ben, or Seb?
That's Ben. That's Ben. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because he's got Haaland captain. So yeah, both Ben and Seb wildcarded in game week 8. So maybe if you both just chat through kind of what was the kind of reasoning behind going with or without Haaland, I guess. Seb first. I keep forgetting I need to say names, otherwise you're going to talk over each other. Not used to it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, as you said, I thought actually it was quite nice that, because so often we see in the FPL community decisions that can maybe loosely be thrown into like the analytics crowd and the non-analytics crowd in terms of, you know, where people are going, which direction. The Haaland or no Haaland one really didn't feel like that. There was a genuine split, just no matter what, you know, whichever way you approach FPL, whichever like sub community that you identify with. There were lots of, as you say, analytics managers with and without, and lots of non-analytics managers on either side too, which I thought was quite nice and probably shows, to be fair, to answer your question of like, you know, why go without him, that it was very close, right? It was pretty marginal. And I think Luke, a couple of weeks ago now, because Luke also went without Haaland, he put it quite nicely, better than me, which was there was just an opportunity. So I think, you know, non-analytics approach and an analytics approach were both telling us that maybe there's a chance to not go with Haaland here. Look at the fixtures, and this is the bit you really need. This was the key thing. It wasn't just the fact that Haaland's fixtures were tougher than average. It was that alternative captains' fixtures were brilliant as well. So even if Haaland's got bad fixtures, you need someone to take the armband off him, I think, really, to go without him. And there was this run of, somewhere like 6 to 8 weeks, where there's basically only 2 fixtures that you'd be scared of, like genuinely scared of Haaland. We're scared every week, but, you know, really scared. And only one of those fixtures is when he was probably the best captain. Like all the rest, there was maybe a better captain. That doesn't mean you had to get Haaland, but I think it presented an opportunity that we may not get again while he's playing for Man City in the Premier League. And so it felt like a really, especially at 2 million, right? I was like 2 million before the wildcard, I think, or in wildcard week. So that always helps, right? That always makes you think, oh, well, I can shoot for this because upside. So yeah, I basically went for it because it felt like a bit of free risk, to put it in that speak. And it did enable some better players in the team, right? I could captain Salah. I captained Son in the first week, and that didn't go as well, unfortunately. So I'd be even better off if I'd got more lucky there.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to keep, for example, Fernandes, Trippier, a slightly stronger midfield. Darwin, for example, is a punt I've got, and a very good bench, which I think has helped out. And my goalkeeper rotation, which if Raya loses his place, then it's not a rotation anymore. But that was part of the plan. Johnston is a good keeper in his own right with good fixtures. You could have just paired him with like Areola and been happy. So I wanted to jump on the idea of potentially getting into David Raya, so Arsenal defence, before anyone else, but also having the backup for him in Johnston. And Johnston rotates perfectly in terms of when Raya had a tougher fixture, Johnston had a good one. And then the crucial week of when Arsenal are playing Brentford, so Raya can't play, I believe, because he's still on loan, not signed permanently. Johnston has a good fixture in that week. So it worked lovely. So little things like that, Haaland just gave me that luxury to try some stuff like that.
Yeah. I was I wasn't wildcarding, so I didn't really have to think it through as much, but I was pretty convinced that it was the right thing to do was to go without Haaland. But then the more I chatted to other people, the more I realised that a lot of that just it was more marginal than I thought. And I think a big factor in it was team value as well. I think people with better team value are running solves and we're getting Haaland in them more often as well. So I think when that can be the difference, just a few 0.1 of a million or whatever it is, and if you're getting big results in terms of whether you own Haaland or not, that's, it's close, basically. And the other key thing is, like, we could be sat here in a alternative universe and Haaland just scored a hat-trick and Salah blanked in both games or missed that penalty. And so that's the funny thing is, like, it's not, when you kind of play in terms of analytics, we don't, when you don't use outcome to judge decisions, it can be very easy to kind of admit when you got something wrong as well. But I think in this circumstance, the outcome, I don't think it changes anything. I don't think it proves anyone right or wrong. To be honest, just both were viable. What was your kind of thought process, Ben? Was there ever a point where you did have a draft without Haaland, or was it always a very easy decision for you to hold him?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think it was an easy decision. Like I say, I came up with the same team as Jan and FPL Blair, I think it is, but I didn't talk to people while I was building it. But I think I just was struggling with the goalkeepers. I didn't like some of the goalkeepers pairings, and maybe I just saw Areola as being such a good option after his tough fixture last week, I think. So I just kind of locked in Areola and Turner as a goalkeeping pair, just included them. And once I'd done that, it basically every draft had Haaland in because I was saving that money. I think that's what happened. And I got a pretty good team with Haaland. I was able to get Salah and Son. I guess the differential, some of the differentials have come through, but Gibbs White, he's my big difference to Seb in midfield, and Gibbs White hasn't done much yet. It's been a bit unlucky, but I think I'm just going to have to be patient with him. Yeah.
You've also done
well.
Now
that I've got Haaland.
So I was just going to say, Ben, you've also done well with both regardless. Like, it's really funny. Like, it's easy to forget that Haaland actually scored this weekend, just gone. Like, I saw when he scored midweek in the Champions League, I saw people tweeting, "Oh, Haaland's back." But he scored on the weekend. It's because for Haaland, 1 goal in 2 games feels like he's
from like a
playing terribly.
3 XG chance or something as well.
Yeah, it's just funny that his standards are so high that he scores 1 goal in 2 games, and suddenly, he literally scored in the previous game, and people are wondering whether he's going to come back or not.
You just forget about it because it's not much of a differential in FPL, so his goals don't mean much. But when you don't own him, you're aware of what he's doing so much more, I think.
Yeah.
Just looking at our teams here, the difference basically is Fernandes for Gibbs White, Darwin for Haaland, and then that extra cash has bought me Trippier over Taylor. That's it. Okay, the goalkeepers, there's a bit more money there, but whatever. That wasn't as much a money thing as a sort of liking that rotation. That's kind of crazy when you think, like, because people are saying, "Oh, what has the Haaland thing done for your team or not?" I guess there it is. It's on paper. That's what the difference has been in our teams. And I think when you look at it like that, it's not like Fernandes or Darwin did amazing. It was the captaincy potentially that has probably made the biggest. I mean, your score is brilliant, by the way, Ben. But in terms of, like, if you thought, if there's a big difference here, it's basically just the Salah captaincy versus the Haaland captaincy. And I think the interesting thing there is obviously you had that route available to you, Ben, but with Haaland in your team, I wonder if all I've done is remove that decision. So, like, if you have Salah and Haaland, of course you can captain Salah over Haaland, but it's so much easier to just be drawn to Haaland, who is basically a viable captain option every week, especially against Brighton.
Yeah, I would have. I'm the opposite. Like, we've got kind of one of each of us. I just have Haaland, and I'm not showing my team because I'm doing badly. I'm actually doing quite well. I'm 180k and had a good week. It's just not that interesting for people to hear, and I wanted to share yours. But yeah, I managed to have a good game week without Salah somehow. I got 90 points in the end, but it's because I had Dallo who scored and Mbeumo and these other players propped me up, and that's happened the last few weeks. I caught that massive Watkins haul. The next week it was a big Sterling haul. This week it was the Dallo goal. I've had little things going my way. And for my thinking, it's not necessarily that I don't think my team would really benefit from a wild card soon. It's more that I think there's more value in a later wild card than most other people think. And I was always set up pretty well because I had Watkins from game week 1 all the way through, so that wasn't a player I needed to replace. This week I can bring in Saka, and it's really this week that's really scary not having Salah, to be honest. This week, because of his fixture and because of how highly he'll be captained, it'll be fun to captain Saka. If it goes well, that could be great. But then from game week 11, it's a bit easier. My team's a lot better from then, and then in 11 because Haaland's got Bournemouth. I know I've got a really good captain. 12's a little bit more scary again, and then they play each other in 13, and I'll hopefully buy Salah in 14. That's the plan. So it's a pretty different route to most people, but it's just what I think is potentially best for my team. And yeah, so far I've been quite fortunate with it. Particularly, I mean, it was really frustrating watching that Liverpool game as someone who doesn't own Salah when they got the penalty, and then not only that, like the last kick of the game. It just as soon as Darwin was breaking through, I was watching it live. I was just like, I just knew what was going to happen. But yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about
huge if you captain.
Talk about like luck and margins. A penalty and a goal that is literally only available because they scored a penalty earlier and there's space on the break. Like, you're talking earlier about decisions and outcome, right? Salah looked like a great captaincy option on paper. In terms of the actual game itself, it kind of only really played out in quite a fortunate fashion. So, which one was it? Lucky or a good decision? Yeah, both, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. There's kind of like different types of luck, I guess, in FPL as a way to think about it. Like the fact that, let's say Salah hadn't scored the second goal and he just got a really nice score of like 8 points or whatever it would have been. You could claim, that feels a bit lucky because he barely had a chance and he just happened to win a penalty. But actually, before the game week, it was a really good decision, so it's not that lucky. So, and we also tend to remember tend to remember the times I was unlucky rather than lucky. So I also just Dallo randomly put the ball in the top corner from the edge of the box. So you might not do that for another few seasons. So
yeah, that was nuts. That was the luckiest thing. I mean, I think all three of us have got Dallo, and that was he's capable of that once a season. But I did not predict it happening this week. It
was weird. I was in a sports bar watching the rugby, and then I was like just glancing up at the screen now, and then I happened to glance up like just as he struck the ball, and then I was like I kind of just assumed it wasn't him. I was trying to work out what player it was.
I thought it was Scott McTominay.
Pleasantly surprised. Yeah. But yeah,
that was the moment of the season so far, I think, and he was such a FPL review analytical pick. And I get a lot of people following me on Twitter just leaving comments about my team, and people were kind of criticizing me for picking Dallo and for keeping Mbeumo and for picking Gibbs White. They were the head scratching picks, and 2 of them have come through so far. I just need Gibbs White. I mean, he hit the bar 2 weeks ago, and he hasn't done it yet. But maybe maybe I'll have to start him against Liverpool this week, and he'll get a goal on the counter attack. That would be good.
Yeah, that's why I really like the FPL Optimize tool, where you can see your expected points versus your actual points as well, and you can see that gap throughout the game week because it just gives you a really good idea of where you're supposed to be. And mine basically this week dropped down loads at the beginning because of Salah, and then it just caught up with a lot of luck in the 3 p.m. games, and then it kind of went as it was supposed to. So it just kind of puts things into perspective. Yeah, I guess
you can think you've had a bad week. You can think you've had a bad week overall, but then some things have gone your way, and you check it, and you're running even, and you can't complain. And I had a look at my on the summary thing where it shows your whole season. I was running behind my predicted score all season by quite a long way, and then it's suddenly just gone to exactly the same. My predicted difference was 50 points, and my real difference is 50.17. So they're exactly the same this week. So my luck has just evened out after this wild card.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess in terms of what we're going to discuss for the rest of the pod, we will touch on Wildcard 10, even though none of us are doing it. We're going to show you an optimal team, so to speak, based on FPL review that they've given us permission to share. And we'll discuss kind of what we would go with, what we agree with in that team, what we disagree with. The other main thing we'll discuss is midfielders, because we feel there's a lot of people, whether they wildcarded in 8 or not, or whether they're wildcarding in 10, just really umming and ahhing over this, the amount of high quality midfielders: Sterling, Son, Salah, Rashford, Saka, Martinelli, Ødegaard. And then whether you go with Palmer to allow a few more expensive ones, whether you keep Mbeumo, there's just a lot of questions there. So that's the other thing we'll cover. But before that, seeing as we've been talking a bit about your plan, Ben, we're going to discuss the free hits. And that might seem like a really random thing to do on this episode, but Ben is very good at thinking ahead. And it's not actually thinking that far ahead. Ben's going to touch now on kind of towards the end of the season. But knowing if you're going to free hit or not at the end of the season, or how viable that is, might impact how viable it is to free hit in 18, which could well change your plans of whether you wildcard in game week 10, whether you wildcard later, for example. So that's why it's potentially relevant now. So on the screen now, Ben, I've just got the fixture schedule from 26 to 38. So yeah, why don't you just do your thing, like talk through kind of when you think the best times are to wildcard, free hit this season, whether it's different to previous seasons, etc., and how that might shape people's thinking now, why that might be relevant now.
Okay, well, most seasons there's an obvious place to play free hit later in the season, or there are like two obvious places, like either a blank or a double game week, and you're spoiled for choice on good opportunities to play it. Especially the past like 2 or 3 seasons with the pandemic and the Queen's death, there's been like lots of ups and downs in the season with blanks and doubles, and there's been some great times to play free hit. But this season it's kind of just a bit of a more of a normal season, even less than a normal season, because the FA Cup semi-finals aren't necessarily going to cause a blank game week because of the free midweek. And then so we've got this big blank game week in game week 29 is the main one because of the FA Cup quarterfinals. So you might think that free hit is best in that blank game week. But if you look at the fixtures around that blank game week 29, for Man City, they play Man United in 27, Liverpool in 28. They're probably going to blank in 29, then Arsenal in 30. And then the fixtures get pretty good again in game week 31. And then they've got Luton at home in 33. Similar for Arsenal. Well, they play Man City, like I said, in game week 30. Then the fixtures get really good from 31. Liverpool it's Liverpool Man City in game week 28, like I said. So for Liverpool, it's kind of a similar story. They could go Man City in 28, blank in 29, or Everton. But it depends. We don't know what the blank's going to be yet. But normally it's the biggest teams blanking in that week. Then it's Liverpool Brighton in game week 30, and the same again in game week 31. There's a fixture swing. Liverpool play Sheffield United at home. It just seemed like a great time to wildcard in game week 31. So instead of free hitting to tackle the big blank game week, you'd wildcard afterwards, after like slowly offloading your top players based on the blanks they've got and their tough fixtures. Then you'd wildcard them all back in and set up your team in game week 31. So I think that kind of really negates the idea of free hitting in the blank. And then there's probably only going to be one big double game week in game week 37, and you could free hit there, or you could save your bench boost for that week. But it looks like a good week to bench boost, and so there's an argument for free hitting in game week 18 because the opportunities to free hit later don't look as juicy as most other seasons.
I guess is the key thing there the fact that it's paired so immediately with the double as well. So for example, you could have triple Brentford, triple City by that point. Their fixtures are also good in general around that time period as well, going into that double. So you can hold them for that whole time, just free hit them all out in 18, and then you've got the 6 remaining in your team, and you can go into the double, the good fixtures, and into the double in 20 with them already.
Yeah, and you've got Liverpool Arsenal in game week 18 as well, so you can fade that fixture. If you were to free hit, then you can get triple Newcastle for Luton, you can get Villa for Sheffield United Sheffield United at home when they'd have got quite difficult fixtures around game week 18. So yeah, there's an argument to be made. But if you plug it in on FPL Review right now, like most of us are only gaining like 12 points, I think. So I don't know if you have to commit to a decision yet. But I suppose if you're thinking about wildcarding this week, it's not too late. You might be saving your wildcard for game week 19, but then if you think actually I'll just free hit in game week 18, that could bring forward your decision to wildcard.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose. But Sam, you're thinking you're going to wildcard then. Anyway, you're going to wildcard later, like around game week 19, maybe.
Yeah, probably in 19. But that's actually part of the thinking for the opposite reason, in that I think that free hit 18 will potentially be really popular. And so if I wildcard in 10, I think it makes sense that I pair it with a free hit in 18, just based on looking at the fixtures and based on when I run it through review. It's significantly better my wildcard in 10 when I pair it with free hit 18. So I think I would commit to that. But because I've decided not to wildcard, that makes 19 even more desirable, because it saves a chip as well, and then I've got my free hit for later also. So by wildcarding 19, you're then not using your free hit in 18. But another thing I hadn't really thought through is what you mentioned there about Liverpool and Arsenal playing each other in 18. Now, when I initially looked at that, my brain initially went to, oh, that's annoying, I can't free hit any Liverpool and Arsenal players in. Because it's those kind of fixtures you want to triple up on the players. But actually, yeah, like you said, realistically, most of us will probably have 4 or 5 players from those two teams anyway. So there's probably more value in the free hit in avoiding that fixture in itself. So yeah, maybe I need to consider whether I do that strategy. Because if I do that strategy, that will definitely mean it makes more sense for me to wildcard earlier, because there'll be no value in wildcarding in 19 or 20 if I'm free hitting in 18 anyway. So it's definitely something to consider. And I guess in general, like, if people are using review to make decisions, and if you're trying to work out still now whether you wildcard or not, set it up with a free hit in 18 and see what the difference is in EV. Set it up without it as well. I think that's the key thing to do. But yeah, when you messaged me before the pod, Ben, and was like, oh, can you get together a screenshot from game week 26 for the end? It did make me laugh. I did think only you are thinking this far ahead, but that's why you're so good at the game, I guess, or one of the main reasons. But it is interesting as well. Like, it's not, well, from my memory, I've not played FPL as seriously until the last few seasons. But is it just because of COVID, and then obviously with the fixtures delayed because of the Queen dying, that we've, those chips have been better later in the season? Because I seem to have a memory that even before then, there would still normally be an obvious week to free hit. Yeah, later in the season.
It's most seasons you get the FA Cup semi-finals causing blanks, which create a nice little time to play a free hit chip, because you get like a double straight after a blank where everybody who's doubling is blanking straight before. So it creates more of a topsy-turvy schedule when that happens, and it's harder to navigate, and it makes the free hit more valuable then. But this season, like I said, game week 34, the FA Cup semi-final weekend, there's a free midweek afterwards. So it's going to be one of those either no blanks or one team blanking, 3 teams doubling. That's what's happened before in those weeks. But what do you think about the idea of free hitting in game week 37? If that's the obvious big double game week, and there's the other double game weeks only have 1 extra fixture or 3 extra fixtures maybe, do you like the idea of free hitting then, because it's the end of the season, there's rotation, or do you think bench boosting is a good idea then, because it's hard to nail a team full of 15 starters then, isn't it?
Well, yeah, particularly if what you're saying is true, in that 31's a really obvious time to wildcard. It's quite a big gap until 37, whereas normally you can go straight into that wildcard bench boost, and then you can start to remove those more expensive players off your bench if you're holding them for a longer period of time. Yeah. When you said, do I like the idea of it? Yeah, I absolutely like the idea of it because it's fun to free hit and just have 22 players, 11 players who double. So the idea of it I really like, but yeah, whether that's viable or not, I don't know. Yeah, I would still always, even in a season like this, would always just try and play my bench boost in a double. And 34, because there's going to be blanks as well, seems like that's going to be an unlikely time to be able to play it. So it seems to me 37 is the only kind of obvious time to play your bench boost in a double. And I think you're making a good argument for free hit 18. And yeah, like you said, it might not mean that people commit to it now, but it might be that in making your transfers, you add that in as a potential thing you might do. And if you're 50-50 on a player, then you on your transfer this week, and then you just run the solve again, but add in free hit 18, and suddenly it prefers one of those players. Maybe that's what swings you this week, just in case you do it. If you were to predict it now, Ben, would you what percentage would you put on the chances of you free hitting an 18?
Or freeing. I thought you were going to ask me about what the percentage chance of the double game week is, because that hasn't been confirmed yet. Game week 20, and we have to wait for that, don't we? But free hitting, what would I say? Maybe I'm 60% likely to free hit then. I'm a bit worried about game week 37 bench boosting when it's so far away from the wild card, and you don't know how to. Setting your team up for a bench boost when you're wildcarding in game week 31 seems difficult. So free hitting in game week 37 does seem like quite a good idea. And then just you can bench boost in a small double game week sometimes if you get like cheap players with a double game week, you can, and then your regular players have good fixtures. Your more expensive players just have good single game week fixtures. You can bench boost in a smaller double game week. So I'm still open to it, and maybe I'll see what FPL Review thinks about that when the fixture horizon moves on forward into like game week 23, 24, 25, and you've got the African Cup of Nations factored in and the Asia Cup, and the landscape is more like you can see further in the future. And I'll see if FPL Review gives it like maybe a 15-point bonus to free hitting, then maybe I'd do it, but I'm not sure. What do you think, Seb?
I'm delighted that I joined you for this, because what I'm going to do, my friend, is I'm going to screenshot this, I'm going to copy it down, and I'm going to do it. I think I've not really looked. Obviously, I've not looked this far ahead, other than speculatively in terms of Sam, you asked there, do we often find running these wildcard free hit strategies in regular seasons, which there hasn't been for quite a while. My memory of that is there's very much a medium-sized double game week and a massive one, and you wildcard appropriately, you free hit in one, you free hit in a blank, you bench boost in one of them, you triple captain in the other, depending on the fixtures, jobs are good. And that was pretty much the pattern most seasons, maybe with a little bit of variation. The biggest memory of variation from that sort of strategy I have is when Chelsea were in the previous formats of the Super Cup, and they had I think they had a blank and a double within the first couple of weeks or something, or at least a blank anyway, because they were off playing the Super Cup or Club World Cup, whichever it was. I think we're maybe edging back towards that normal strategy, but as Ben has put beautifully there, maybe not quite this season yet, maybe next season. And for me, I'd pretty much written off free hitting in 18, if only because I was being drawn back to that usual pattern of use it in those big doubles, the end of the season, get through period. And maybe because I've just wildcarded 18 in the period around it without a free hit. But I'm tempted to look at it because, so what would be different to yours, and I'm envious of your route with this plan in mind for obvious reasons. I think it makes good sense. And I do like the old downside, other than, fixtures changing, whatever, and some randomness, is, as Ben said, that really long distance. I think that'd be the longest we've ever done a wildcard and a bench boost. We did, was it last year? There was about 4 weeks or so between, I think, a popular wildcard and a bench boost. If this is looking at about 6 weeks, that is an awful long time. But you don't actually have to fully commit to that bench boost. There's a lot of time for transfers. There's a lot of time for things to change. Even if you build a wildcard that has a bench boostable team already, well, you're going to want to make transfers. And then if that bench boost wasn't available to you for whatever reason, I still think the wildcard there makes sense. Just looking at City's fixtures, that potential blank, United, Liverpool, Brighton, potential blank, Arsenal, and then into Villa, Palace, Luton, Tottenham, Forest, Wolves to see out the season, so on, Fulham and West Ham at the end. That's lovely. That's an absolute gift to be able to, maybe I don't ignore Haaland this time, maybe I'll hold him, but, drop all the rest of those players, wild card straight back in, and you can accompany it with some other nice fixture shifts there as well. I think, you mentioned there's a few other teams. Liverpool is viable around then. And of course, it's the expensive assets that really matter to us when using the chips more than anyone else. So if it's anything that involves Haaland and Salah, I am very tempted to get chips in.
Yeah. It's just really...
I just did now with Salah and Haaland.
It's just really interesting because we've not. I just think there's loads of people who haven't even considered I just say this because I've not really considered it. I've not seen a lot of it on Twitter, like free hit in 18. So I think just even mentioning the fact that it's viable is really like interesting in itself. So you've definitely got me thinking, Ben. But yeah, at the moment, I probably will stick to the plan because I like the idea of just wildcarding all those players for the double. But it could absolutely kill me then if that double's not announced as well. But yeah, we'll see.
You're okay wildcarding on Christmas Day, like thinking about your wildcard team on Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day. That just seems a bit painful, doesn't it?
You don't. What else do you do on Christmas?
You spend time with your family.
There's games on Boxing Day, mate. I don't. What do you?
Yeah, it's also the fact that for me, I find it easy to hold it because game week 14 is actually quite a nice window as well, potentially for people who are holding their wildcard. That might open up as a nice option also. Cool. Now we've long-term thinking, we'll go very short-term instead. And yeah, we wanted to kind of particularly focus on midfielders. And then when we move on to the questions at the end, we will cover other positions. And when we look at the potential wildcard in 10. So I guess just initially, your guys' thoughts. Salah, we've already discussed. Like if you've got him, you obviously hold him. If you don't have him, you've tried to get him. And you obviously go for him if you're wildcarding in 10. What about like... Let's go Man United first. Rashford and Bruno. Do you think? Let's say you have both of them. Which would you sell this week if you need to sell one to get Saka, for example, in your team?
Rashford,
yeah.
Penalties, minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think his numbers are a bit down on last year. He had a great year last year, and he's not replicating that. He's even his numbers are down on earlier in the season, I think, as well, and. Yeah, he's been subbed off earlier more often, and that was one of the reasons for wildcarding back in game week 8 was to get rid of Rashford.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's like with Rashford, it's not. Yeah, like I said, the performances are obviously concerning, but we know how good he is as a player, and also know that particularly earlier in the season, he was still getting lots of chances. It is specifically the minutes, and it's similar to with Son on Monday. I think a lot of people changed their mind on Son on Monday in terms of they were more wary of selling him after he scored and assisted, but actually. I think that's perfectly fine as well. But the key thing wasn't necessarily the goal and the assist. It was the fact he played over 80 minutes and seemed absolutely fine, which he's not done for ages. Whereas if he'd come off again at early 70 minutes, he'd suddenly feel like a really easy sell. So that's another thing. That's it's the minutes that are the key thing when it comes to short term stuff like that. But you just wouldn't be surprised if because after this match, after game week 10, they've got Fulham, Luton, Everton. You wouldn't be surprised if Rashford just bangs in a hat-trick in one of those games. These players can do it, which we know, but now's the time to sell him before he plays City for sure. Definitely, and with all the other options in midfield. And yeah, some of those options are Arsenal players, and I looked at review actually, and this is quite long-term, but just to give you an idea of the quality of the assets in general. And over the next 12 game weeks, Ødegaard and review loves Ødegaard. Ødegaard and Saka are basically identical for EV. It's really, really similar. And I wonder if it's what we've discussed a few episodes ago of whether there's just that penalty thing, whether they do have it just completely 50-50 between the two of them, for example, where we maybe think now is more like 70-30 for Saka or 20-20-20-20 amongst about 5 players. It's just really interesting how similar their EV is, but I guess you would still go Saka regardless because the price is the same.
Yeah, I mean, we just said minutes and penalties for Bruno. So I could apply that logic to Saka and Ødegaard as well. Well, they've both got the minutes, although Saka is, just forever getting injured and then being fine. So maybe there's a bit of a Son going on there. At some point we'll learn that he's out. But I think minutes are fine at the moment. And then, penalties. I would edge Saka in terms of probably like a 60-40 split. I think, without meaning this literally, I think the way it could be working is that Saka basically gets first dibs. So if it's the first opportunity to take a penalty in a goalless match, so he hasn't scored, I think there's a very good chance he takes it. If it's a match where, say, Arsenal have scored, are winning, and especially if Saka has scored, and we saw he'd taken a penalty and scored previously, there is then the opportunity for him to give it away to Ødegaard or to Martinelli based on conversations. I have no idea. And then I think there's one final caveat there, which is in a goalless state match where there's a penalty earned, there is the chance where Ødegaard can say, I fancy this, and Saka says, okay. And we've seen that happen as well. There was, I think it was a 0-0 match, penalty won, and Ødegaard took it, not Saka. But then in another 0-0 match, we've seen Saka take it since then. So I think I would edge Saka 60-40, but with an absolute bunch of caveats. But I think if you were to like map all that out, what you'd end up with is it's like Saka and then if various things and then other people. Because even if Saka doesn't take it, you can't guarantee that Ødegaard is taking it. It could be Martinelli. I mean, hell, it could be Jesus one match.
Could be Havertz as well.
I mean,
He's on the pitch.
genuinely could. Yeah, he got one, didn't he? Yeah, a great shout. So like, I think you have to go Saka just because if you don't, then you're basically picking from 2 or 3 players who are on penalties. So even if you're not super confident that it's Saka, he has to have your majority share. And so if everything else is relatively even, minutes, open play threat-ish, I think Saka maybe just edges that. But we saw very similar non-penalty numbers between the 3 of them, the third being Martinelli last season. So I would just edge Saka. And as you say, price-wise, if there's nothing in it, I think it's simple enough. But it'll be one of those where there'll be a 20-point swing between them for no real reason in 5 weeks.
Yeah, Alex is saying in the chat, Jorginho could take one, which is 100% true. Could take
gosh,
one.
yeah, but I genuinely could, right?
Yeah.
Imagine you get 94th minute in a tough fixture. It's 0-0. Jorginho's got that calm.
Ramsdale off the bench to take.
I
one,
much prefer Saka. I think Ødegaard his numbers aren't as good. Like expected assists this year, like a third of what they were last year. It's a small sample size, but this is the worst season of his career in terms of chances created and expected assists. Maybe it's the system, or maybe it's just variance. But, and Saka's like having a better year number wise than he's had before in terms of non-penalty expected goals and assists, expected assists. I think there's a bigger gap in my mind than there is on what review is saying. But
I just kind of wonder in general whether, even though like now we've got a small sample and we've got the whole of last season, even though their non-penalty like goal threat numbers were really similar, I just do wonder if like last season was just an outlier and there was something about the way that they played, just because of what we know about Ødegaard as a player and that he's generally a creator. I do wonder whether just last season was a one-off and actually what we're seeing this season is just what Ødegaard is generally going to be like, less goal threat than Saka and Martinelli, and the fact that review has Ødegaard so high or so similar to Saka is the fact it values long-term data, which is a good thing in general, but like maybe it's somewhere in the middle. And yeah, I don't know, but I guess we've like
I saw a
go on.
Sorry. No, please, I interrupted you there.
I finished.
So I saw a tactical take on sort of, not really an explanation for that, but some insight into that, where against, the classic low block counter-attack team type thing, but, does that suit Ødegaard better or does it suit, the types of Saka? I think it's very hard to go, it's the old Son theory, right, where, he'll score against a good team away from home because he has all this space to run into, but he'll also score against bad teams at home, as we've just seen. Like he's just better. He's a better player, so he will score in more matches. For a real football like analysis, as opposed to FPL, I think that's very relevant. What fixture suits him. For FPL, I think it's a little more of a dice roll when we're talking about those sort of things. So with that in mind, the take I saw on the Arsenal was when they are facing a team that they're having to break down a bit more as opposed to finding space, Ødegaard generally gets better chances closer to goal. He did score some brilliant long shots last season, and actually at first I wrote him off because I was like, they're just long shot bangers, variants, don't need to worry about it. But he was getting good XG chances, typically against poorer teams because of the way they were building up, as opposed to like Xhaka having room to burst into and then moving it more quickly. They were in a position, excuse me, I just hit the mic, sorry if that hurt anyone's ears. They were in a position where the ball was being worked further forward, but sort of more deliberately, slowly, finding the chances more carefully. And so Ødegaard was moving into positions where he's more likely to get higher XG opportunities, as opposed to if Arsenal are breaking quickly, where he's left behind a bit more by the play. He's creating as opposed to catching up to it. No, of course, that's a lot to then put on, well, will Ødegaard score against, I don't know, Fulham or something like that? The answer is we don't know. But if maybe you wanted to take that forward and look at their fixtures and think, okay, do I think these fixtures could suit an Ødegaard, not more than Saka, but with that theory in mind, I think it's something you could play with. And I'm not saying that's what reviews got in mind, but if those longer term numbers, have Ødegaard and Saka slightly more similar, but you think Saka's more clear, I think this maybe comes back to the tactical shift with Havertz. If we think that potentially is preventing Ødegaard taking up those same positions against, say, the poorer teams, because while Havertz is doing that tracker role, Havertz obviously is playing it differently and is less likely to fill those spaces in terms of different attacking phases. And so I think Ødegaard may well be further away from goal. So I'd be interested in looking into that, even if the conclusion is like, oh, that's interesting. Don't base an entire FPL decision on it, you know?
Yeah, and sorry, Alex made a good point in the chat that Odegaard is a lot better for bonus points. So when he does tend to score, he's generally goes straight onto them, whereas Saka might need 2 returns, for example, or if they both score, it's more likely to be Odegaard, which I think is just chance creation, I would imagine, is the main thing, and passing numbers. But I guess a more difficult question, because we kind of all agree that we would go with Saka, and I guess we will all own Saka this week, although maybe not. Where would you stand in terms of if you own, let's say, Maddison and Son, because a lot of people are in that position? Firstly, if you are wildcarding, and secondly, just if you own those two, like, would you look to switch to Saka straight away now, or do you hold off? Because Saka, the interesting thing is that Arsenal play Newcastle in game week 11, so I think a lot of people are just thinking, just wait and do it in 12, which I see the logic behind. Do you know, where do you guys stand on that? Is it that you would sell Maddison but not Son, or would you just do it? Yeah, what do you think, Ben?
To get to Saka, they're a similar price point, Maddison and Saka. So I would sell Maddison. I think Maddison and Son are both good value for money. They're both great. Like, Son is putting up such good numbers, like almost the best of his career, really, in terms of non-penalty XG plus XA. Like, yeah, better than any season he's had, and he's such a good finisher. I wouldn't want to sell Son and Maddison. And that's what the review suggested for me to do this week. When I originally wildcarded in game week 8, it was saying in game week 10 you want to be getting in Saka for Maddison, as well as like a defensive downgrade. I think Porro to Gabriel. So I might do that, or I might just do a boring transfer and get Gabriel as well as Tsimikas. But I'm not thinking about selling Son.
Yeah, what about you, Seb?
I think for me, Ben alluded to it a bit there. It's kind of a budget thing. So there's a few scenarios. If you aren't on wildcard, maybe you have just wildcarded. I had Fernandes, Son, and Maddison. I no longer have Fernandes, and I do have Saka. So I've kept both Son and Maddison. But I don't have Haaland. So, I have a bit of a luxury there. And I might even reverse the Saka Fernandes move in the following weeks. And then I have a little plan to try and get Haaland for about 16. If you are wildcarding this week, again, I think it maybe comes down to if you want to keep Haaland, which I know we'll come on to in a minute. If you don't, then Son is obviously a much easier hold because you have that money. If you do want to keep Haaland and you want Salah, and I don't know if you want Trent, Trippier, whatever it is, I think then Maddison looks more attractive because while Son is brilliant, Maddison is also doing a great job for 1.5-ish, something like that, maybe a bit less, cheaper. So I think that becomes easier from a whole team point of view. Even if every week, you lose the Maddison-Son battle, you might win the team battle overall. Whatever you do, though, I do think you'd be looking at Saka soon. If you're wildcarding, you probably do it now. If you're making transfers, as I mentioned, as you mentioned, there's a couple of fixtures that are good, one that is bad, and actually the alternatives kind of have similar sort of idea. So you could make it now, you could make it in a couple of weeks. I think the idea is you need to end up there.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, isn't it? And I think the thing was, like, I would probably, if I just had the money, I probably would do Maddison to Saka. If I just had 2 free transfers and not a lot to do, I probably would do it. I just really love this fixture for Saka particularly.
One thing I should mention as well.
Sorry, go on, Seb.
No, so it just occurred to me. I think I was on delay there. Sorry, I thought I'd got in when you were taking a break. Apologies. So captaincy. So I was just thinking, I think it was Flapjack that mentioned this earlier in the week, that if you're looking at your captaincy now, even if you don't have Haaland, but especially if you have Haaland and Salah, Son's captainable fixtures start drying up. So there is potentially an argument there that you don't need Son as much, but obviously his points potential is still good.
Yeah, and you're not going to captain Saka either, though, unless you're like me, you don't have Salah this week, basically. And yeah, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, there's a guy called Rob T on Twitter who a lot of you will follow. He posts a lot of really interesting. He often posts like the market odds and the kind of projected goals for the Arsenal Sheffield United game are the highest of any match so far this season. I think they projected 3 goals. I think it's the first one to hit 3. I think Liverpool are projected 2.6 against Forest or something. So yeah, I would just attack this fixture even though they've got Newcastle next personally, probably. What about people who have? I think quite a few people on Wildcard 8 went for Diaz. I know neither of you did, and maybe it was less popular within the analytics community, but because of the injury to Gakpo at the time, and Jota, a lot of people went from, and the idea was you went from for 2 weeks for these 2 fixtures, or maybe for 3 weeks. But like, I think he's an interesting one where actually, maybe because Nunes has played tonight, maybe even you just hold Diaz because he plays Forest and don't switch him to Saka, although many people would have had that planned. I think he's an interesting one as well. But because of what you said about you want Saka anyway, and it's probably the opposite with Diaz, you probably want to sell him eventually anyway, maybe just do it now before Sheffield United. He was just another player I had in mind because I just saw him in a few wildcard teams as well. We'll move on now to kind of, I guess, cheaper midfielders, because I've got them listed here and categorised as over 7 million, and now these are the ones that are the 7 million and below, which Sterling just about sneaks into, who's probably not a viable buy now at all. In fact, definitely isn't. But Cole Palmer has emerged essentially. Do you guys think it's as simple as there's a player who costs whatever it is, 4.9 or whatever he costs, and he takes penalties and is playing every week? Just an absolute no-brainer, particularly if you're wildcarding. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I think he's probably the best cheap midfielder. I'm just looking at Mikel Tokman's tables, and he's got Palmer as the best midfielder under 6.5. I think he prefers Matoma, but is he definitely on penalties, do you think?
Yeah, he's taken 2 in a row now, I think. Well, there's the whole chat with Sterling, wasn't it? I guess that might make you doubt it a bit.
But even his underlying numbers, excluding penalties, have been pretty good as well. So he looks like a great option. What are their fixtures? Amazing, are they though? So you'd have to start him in some tougher fixtures, or maybe you'd bench. He's cheap enough to bench though, isn't he? But yeah,
I think the interesting thing with him is, particularly if you look at the fixtures, firstly, I think he's almost like killed some other options, like Morgan Gibbs-White, for example, who's really cheap. I feel like because he's like, Gibbs-White is about something like 500,000 more, you just go for Palmer now, even when Gibbs-White has good fixtures. The tricky thing with Palmer is he's got Brentford, Spurs, City, Newcastle, Brighton, Man United in his next 6. But I think if you're wildcarding, because of what you mentioned, Ben, about the fact he's benchable, so you're probably going to have good depth because you've just wildcarded. Because of his fixtures from 16, which are Everton, Sheffield United, Wolves, Palace, Luton, Fulham, I just feel like, particularly if he stays on penalties, which I think will happen, and with the way he's playing, I think he'll play regularly, you're just going to want him then, and you're going to be transferring him in at some point there anyway. So I think you just buy him now and save yourself a transfer. The other option is you would have someone like Diaby, for example, for 2 really good fixtures, or because he's so cheap, there's not really an easy placeholder even. So I just think you just go for him as your 5th midfielder. That would be my view on it if you're wildcarding. Yeah, do you have any thoughts, Seb, on him? Do you like him a lot?
I think, yes. I think the only concern is fixtures, and he's 0.4 or 0.5 more than Archer, who you were going to bench every single week anyway. So, it could take that spot in your squad in terms of someone who's benched for 4 weeks. And then, as you say, you get to play him. On penalties, I think obviously Nkunku, when Nkunku's back, we'll want to reassess that. I'm unsure when he's back. I know training wise could be actually for their good run. Oh, got you there, my friend.
Okay, we're back now, I think. We're back. I think we lost connection.
Lovely. So I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know if we were gone or just your camera.
I think we're
okay. So yeah, very quickly. Cool. Very quickly run that up then. Yeah. So want to reassess when Nkunku's back, but yeah, I think he's cheap enough still not to matter. And then in terms of penalties, I think he's certainly first choice, it seems. And in terms of Sterling maybe taking it off him, I'm almost glad we know that was a possibility, because if we didn't, we'd be 100% on Palmer and then Sterling would surprise us. We know it's a little bit of a possibility, but actually we got that nice confirmation that Enzo basically went up and said, no, it's Palmer's. So Sterling tried to take it and was told no, Palmer took it. So for me, that's quite a nice confirmation actually that Palmer is the preferred choice.
Yeah, if there's not a more senior player on the pitch, someone in fact, how old is Enzo? I've just made up that he's senior. But anyway, a more experienced player than Palmer.
He's like 23. He's like 23.
But a lot more, still a lot older than Palmer. If there wasn't another player to kind of intervene, maybe Sterling would have just taken it and his kind of character would have won over. But like Sterling's so bad at penalties. I don't know what argument he's got to take it. His record's so bad; it's nearly as bad as Watkins' record. So he's not really got a good argument to take it, other than he's a better, kind of more established player. I know what I wanted to kind of move on to Mbeumo, because I think it's quite a similar situation with him in that his short-term fixtures aren't particularly good. But he's going to be a buy at some point anyway, so I don't think you sell him on Wildcard, because this is just off the top of my head. If you do sell him on Wildcard, you're going to need a plan to get him in game week 14, so I wonder if you just keep him. Just the fact he's on penalties, even though he's got Chelsea, West Ham, Liverpool, Arsenal, maybe just bank on the fact he gets one penalty in those 4 games and maybe just sneaks another return. Because again, it's just that, because we know transfers are so valuable in and of themselves. And I just think Mbeumo is just like such a good asset. It's the fact I don't think he's one of those players where analytics players or eye test players or more narrative driven players just all agree on it, because it's as simple as there was a really good striker. He's no longer playing anymore. They've got this other really good player who's replaced him and is also taking penalties and is even cheaper than Tony was, and is in midfield to get some. There's just so many little things that add up for him, and he plays 90 minutes. So I think he's a really easy player to you 100% hold him if you're not wildcarding. I don't think he's a sell at all. But yeah, if you're wildcarding, it's maybe a bit more of a decision. But I would just think, maybe a similar thing to Palmer. Maybe just keep him during this fixture period, because you're going to want to buy him back anyway. From 14, he's got Luton, Brighton, Sheffield United. Don't know. A lot of people, like you said, Ben, earlier, there's a lot of criticism in terms of holding Mbeumo. Wasn't there?
It's just because of the misses of he's had a few bad game weeks, but his underlying numbers have been good. He's had a boost in his XG now that he's been the central striker for Brentford. Now that Tony's not been there anyway, and I think he's good enough to even start in the tougher fixtures. Maybe a bench him for Liverpool away, but I think I'd be okay starting him at home to Arsenal and this week away at Chelsea. I think Brentford are quite good at those kind of games where they play the tougher teams and they get conceded possession to those teams and hit them on the counter attack. That's when Mbeumo can get the highest XG chances, and I'm happy holding him.
I think I was going to say, my mind's just gone blank. I was going to mention what Tom said in the chat. So he just said that if you're wildcarding, there's not many transfers to do in the next 4 game weeks, because of the types of players you're buying. And in general, that's the case, isn't it? When you wildcard, so actually maybe he is the player that you sell. And he said he might go for Matoma. And if you've got a player like that with good short-term fixtures, that does make a lot of sense. Similar price.
Literally what I was going to mention. I think the only scenario is like a Bowen or a Matoma can take that slot for a couple of weeks, because there's a nice little overlap with fixtures and price points in your midfield. Then maybe you could return to Mbeumo. But I think that's the thing, that you definitely want to return. So if you've already wildcarded and still have Mbeumo, like me, for example, I think selling could probably be foolish, because I've got other priorities with my transfers. If you are on wildcard this week, I think 4 or 5 weeks, and Matoma 25 points, and then you're looking pretty. But if you don't have that luxury, it's not one to force. There are other things to do. Arsenal players, Liverpool players, City plans, whether you have or don't have them. I think there are probably better uses of your transfers unless you're in a comfy position.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess there was just a couple of other teams I kind of wanted to kind of just touch on before we just move on to actually looking at the review wildcard. So one of them was Bowen. Do you think he's like a viable option? I think he's 100% a good option, but do you think it's just a case of, do you think he's a viable option with the other amount of quality midfielders available? And do you think it's just a case of there's other high priority players, or? I
think that's it. I really, really like him as an option, but he's always just like the 6th midfielder or something.
Yeah.
Either because of being slightly more expensive, or good minute penalties. And that sounds silly, but if I've got a midfielder, Fernandes, Son, Salah, Saka, and Mbeumo, every single one of them takes a penalty and has good minutes and has good fixtures, and then I'll move them around. Bowen always just seems to be that number 6, and is maybe fighting for the spot with someone like Matoma, who I think probably just edges it as an option.
Yeah, I think it's the key thing.
His XG is his underlying stats are pretty good, but he is overperforming his XG. Like that goal last weekend was so lucky with the deflection.
Oh yeah.
And he's not historically overperforming his XG that much, so I'm not that worried about not owning him. And he wasn't really a consideration for me when I wildcarded in game week 8. So
it's an annoying way to lose the match cash clean sheet.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I was
played him over Burn. I could have had a even bigger score. Agreed. Very good.
You're not allowed to complain, Seb, this week.
I was gonna say as I started that sentence, I was like, just stop.
Good self-awareness. Yeah, the other team I wanted to mention was Brighton, because I guess they've become interesting because not just because of their fixtures, but the injury to March. But there's just seems to be just loads of uncertainty in general. Like you talk to Brighton fans even, and they just don't know what De Zerbi's going to do. So the fact March has got injured, like I just wouldn't be surprised. You know, people are expecting that Endriga, I think that's how you pronounce it, will play in that position because he's a natural right winger, and therefore he becomes really good value. But it feels really high risky to commit to it now straight away. And you've got there's just other forwards in Mitoma, Fati, Gross, Ferguson, João Pedro, etc. And they just seem to be a really fluid team. I think there's something in that. Like even with like Fati's been playing central quite a lot, but we know he's naturally a winger, for example, or he's played centrally, but naturally a left winger. Like, is there a chance that Fati plays left wing and Mitoma like moves up to the right wing? Even I don't know if he's ever played there. I just wonder if that's just a wait and see for 1 or 2 game weeks, and then you hop on the one, unless you go for Mitoma where you just know he's going to play, and that's the
I think it's an option, but I'd prefer Mitoma if you can spare the funds. And then I think because Welbeck's injured, I'm not sure how long for. Ferguson on the bench tonight, João Pedro and Fati have started as the sort of 9 and 10. I'd probably Dringa started tonight as well as along with Mitoma. I'd probably prefer João Pedro over Dringa, just in terms of squad structure. That forward spot seems easier to play with than maybe another midfield spot. The price is still good. Is on penalties when he plays. And of course, I made that call later in the season and probably got it wrong. I think, I was too ambitious on the minutes. But if Danny Welbeck is indeed out, that's less competition. It's then basically just Fati and Ferguson that he's fighting for one of the 9 and 10 spot with. And I would feel a bit better about that. Although if you're on wildcard this week, he did start tonight. So I would just check his minutes because Brighton are rotating heavily. They've played a strong team tonight. So there's a chance if Ferguson's fit, he may get the start of the weekend over João Pedro.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're all pronouncing him differently, aren't we? Adingra is the pronunciation, but it's okay. But he just got his third 90 minute in a row. He just got his third 90 in a row for Brighton. So 90 before the international break, 90 last week, 90 tonight. He looks quite good with those minutes. But maybe he's a consideration for me in like a couple of weeks. Still sick of Gibbs White. I didn't downgrade him to Adingra at that point, but he's looking promising, isn't he? And he got tonight. And that's a good.
We're just losing connection again. Can you talk for me again, Ben?
Yep.
I think
can you hear me?
I think you stopped speaking just as we got connection back. Actually.
Did you hear what I said? Is Seb's mic on? Okay, I've got like the red microphone symbol on.
That's me just muting myself when I'm not talking, so that I don't.
Okay.
Okay. Great etiquette. I never do that. With Adingra, so nothing. How do you spell it? ADI. I pronounced it wrong because I wrote it wrong. Yeah.
Nice.
What about Mbeumo? I think people often get that wrong when they go Mbeumo. They see the
E, UE.
The U before the E, but it's actually UE. Yeah.
Oh, the one that really annoys me is Firmino. People say Firmino like it's got an HO at the end. Firmino.
Oh, Rafinha for us, or just to get too many letters in there.
Yeah.
Or not enough because he obviously had the H in the P. Yeah.
Mbeumo is.
Did you get my bit about Ading?
Yeah,
another 90 minutes tonight.
Yeah. Oh, he played 90 minutes tonight, did he, as well? That is important. Yeah. I just think that's again, it's hard to know what you read out of that, isn't it? But with Yeah, he's. I know Luke really likes him, but Luke likes those like more risky, high explosive players. A lot of it's to do with risk appetite, I think, with Adingra. Just based on a game week 10 wildcard with a team value of about 101, I think, as well, which is maybe about average. I don't know. Mine's a lot lower than that. And this is on 12 game weeks. And yeah, you might be looking at this and think you've run it and got a different team. That's going to be the case. It depends on what settings you have, etc. But this gives us a vague idea of the team that reviews suggesting. And I'll read it out for people listening as well. So the goalkeepers are Areola and Flecken. It's then Matikash, Gabriel, Simicas, Gvardiol and Taylor. Midfielders are Salah, Saka, Erdegaard, Diaby and Palmer. And then the strikers are João Pedro, Watkins and Haaland. So it has those 8 attackers that you would rotate, which I presume maybe João Pedro rotates well with Palmer or something like that. And I don't know, are there any kind of picks here that just like, I guess we'll just touch on the ones that stick out to you as surprising, or because there's a lot of them there that are obvious. Is there anything that is surprising to you? There's only a couple there for me, to be honest. One of them's Gvardiol.
Well, I like the idea that we've just picked up Mbeumo and he's not in this team, but he is the first transfer.
Yeah.
So that is because Villa have Luton. What it's done is it's gone, you're wildcarding, get Luton, get triple Villa and have Luton. When I run a solve for myself earlier, I got a little bit of a different team. So I didn't have DRB. I did have Mbeumo, but instead it had Matty Cash and Luca Dean at the back. And then it immediately wanted me to do Dean to Dallo. So, which means we've lost the stream again.
It looks like it.
I'll wait for him to pop back up and then.
Sorry, I think
is he back?
Are we back? YouTube says we're back.
Yeah.
YouTube doesn't. YouTube's
we're struggling. Yeah, I think we're back now. I think we can go.
That's a shame.
Sorry, bear with us, everybody.
So it's not broadcasting live now, do you? I think it's all cut off.
Yeah. I mean, if he's not in this call anymore, is he? And he was hosting it.
No.
So.
I'll just take a break quickly and go to the loo.
Yeah, no worries, mate. If we pop back on, I will monologue, I suppose.
Can you hear me, Sab? Hello, can you hear me, Seb?
Actually, just seen Ben walk off, which means we might be here, so that's fun.
Yeah.
Still seems very stuttery.
Can you hear me, Seb, or not? No.
Yeah.
Oh, you
can see like YouTube is gonna don't actually have Sam in our call, so I have no idea if Sam can hear me. But yeah. The perils.
I have no idea. I might just be sat here live. That's hilarious. I think I'm just going to end stream.